overview of the Form 1040. We're looking at the 2015 version of this form, and I'm just going to go over the basic concept of the form, the general areas of the form, and eventually throughout the course you will have a better understanding of each of the individual line items. Your Form 1040 is the main reporting form for an individual tax return. However, there is so much information that goes into a tax return that it cannot all be clearly represented, the information clearly presented in just one form. So this is where all the totals of the various categories and income categories, expense categories come. However, there are numerous schedules and additional forms that have to be completed and are then attached to this main form, and they include all the detail of the totals seen on this form. So, for example, you see here on line 8A, attach Schedule B. I'm going to put the total amount of interest earned right here on 8A. However, on Schedule B, which is attached to this Form 1040, would then be listed out all the detail of the interest I earned. Same thing here, Schedule C. This is for business income, those self-employed individuals. All of the detail, the income, the breakdown of expenses is going to be on the schedule. On this line here, line 12, I would just see my total net number that's taxable. And then you see there's other things, attached Form 4797. There's tons of forms you'll see here on line 25. Form 8889, Form 3903, Form 2106. So there's numerous forms, numerous schedules that are attached to the Form 1040, again, that provide detail to the numbers that you're seeing on the Form 1040. The top of the 1040 is all informational type things. You have to put your first name, last name, your address, all in this main section here. Your social security number goes in this top right. There's the option here for the presidential election campaign. This is the filing status. You would select which box applies to you, and if there's a blank space, you would then need to enter, in this case, the social security number of the spouse. In this case, over on number 4, the name of the dependent. These blank lines on the right is where you would add up the number of dependents based on what is listed here in 6. So if you're claiming yourself, you'd mark 6A. If you also have a spouse, you'd mark 6B, and then you could then list any dependents that you'd be claiming. So that's all the information they're looking for there. The first section of the 1040 then is all the income, and everything that could be potentially taxable income should be listed in this section. Very quickly, the main things you'll see is W-2 income. That goes on line 7. Line 8 and line 9 are for interest and dividends, and you'll see here that there's a 8A and an 8B, and same for 9A, 9B. All of these fields here that are in the blue that aren't in the main column on the right are informational type numbers. In the case of 8B, you would list tax exempt interest. That's interest that is not going to be taxed or included in the total gross income, but it still is reported to the IRS. Same for IRA distributions over here on 15A, pension, Social Security. Those are amounts of income that you receive that aren't necessarily taxable, but do need to be reported still. So then, in these cases, the 15A, the 20A, 16A, the taxable portion is then going on the B of that line, so 15B, 16B. So for example, if I had 20,000 in IRA distributions, but for whatever reason only 10,000 were taxable, I would put 20,000 on 15A, and 15B I would only have the 10,000. Then what happens is all the amounts listed here, all of the income from line 7 to line 21 in this far right column are added up, and you get a total income number. So that means that all of the numbers in the blue over here, all the 8B, 9B, 15A, 16A, 20A, those amounts are not added in. Another thing to note is line 21 is other income. So if there's any sort of income that doesn't fall into one of the classifications up above, it would just go on line 21. For example, gambling income goes here. Okay, moving down, once we have our total income, we then can make some adjustments to that, and that goes under the second section of the first page of the 1040. And basically what we're doing here is there's some deductions that are allowed which are adjusted straight off the total gross income in order to get to an adjusted gross income figure, as you see on line 37. So some of the things that go into calculating your adjusted gross income, once you have your total income, you then can subtract from that anything in this section here. So that includes, for example, line 23, educator expenses. People who contribute to an HSA, a health savings account, they could deduct that on this line 25. Line 26, if you have moving expenses you incurred to move to a new place for a job. Self-employed health insurance, if you're self-employed, you pay for your own health insurance. That would be listed here on line 29. Also the self-employment tax, the deductible portion is on line 27. There's a few other things here. If your alimony paid, if you had to pay alimony to a spouse, that would be a deduction for adjusted gross income. If you contributed to an IRA, certain student loan interests and tuition deductions can go in here. So those are the main things you'll see as deductions to your total income in order to get to your adjusted gross income. So as you can read right here, subtract line 36 from line 22. So you add up all of your deductions. That total goes on line 36, and line 37, your adjusted gross income, is your total income minus your deductions. So once you get to your adjusted gross income on line 37, you go on to page 2 and you take that same number from line 37 and put it on line 38, just so that it flows through very nicely. So we still have here at the top our total adjusted gross income. This next section, tax and credits. This is where the actual taxable income is determined, and the tax on that taxable income, as well as some certain credits that can be applied to offset that tax. As you can see here, there's some things you could mark. There's additional exemptions given if you are over a certain age or if you are blind. So if that would apply, you'd mark those boxes and a total number would come up here. And you can then calculate the additional deduction you get. Itemized deductions, as previously discussed, Schedule A would need to be attached, which would show you all of the breakdown of the interest on your home, the property taxes, the donations. However, all you see on line 40 is the total of all of those. And line 40, actually you include either or, your total itemized deductions, which would be reported on a Schedule A, or your standard deduction. And as you'll learn, they offer a standard deduction, which they list here on the left. You figure out what that amount is. And typically, although there's different strategies, typically the higher of your itemized deductions or your standard deduction would be reported on line 40. We then have our exemptions here, depending on how many exemptions we listed on line 60. So we'd come back up to the top, 60 right here. However many total number of exemptions we claimed would be multiplied by 4,000, and that number goes on 42. So if there's only 2 exemptions, myself and my spouse, then I would do 2 times 4,000 and I'd put 8,000 on line 42. So once we have those figures figured out, we take our adjusted gross income, we subtract the standard deduction or itemized deduction from line 40, and then we subtract the exemptions from line 42, and that gives us our taxable income, which is line 43 here. Once we have that taxable income figure, we can then calculate the tax, and we would use tax schedules for that, whatever tax schedule is available for the particular year that we're preparing a return for. And that tax figure, whatever we determine the tax is, would go on line 44. In some cases, it would then be necessary to calculate an alternative minimum tax. That's additional tax on high income earners. That would go on line 45. There could also be some other taxes owed, advanced premium tax credit if people received the premium tax credit on their health insurance, but maybe they underestimated their income and got a large credit, and it turns out that actually they didn't qualify for that credit. They would have to repay that, and that would be added in on line 46. We'd then add all of those lines, and that would give us, to this point, the amount of tax owed. We then come down here to this section, 48 through 54, which gives some various credits. These are credits, tax credits that are offered that you can basically deduct. Whatever your credit is, you can deduct that from the tax you owe. So you would add up all your credits here on line 55, and you would subtract that total from the total tax calculated on 47. However, you note here, if line 55 is more than line 47, then you enter 0. So for these credits here, on line 48 through 54, if you have more credits than you owe in tax, you just lose those credits and your tax is 0. So if my tax is $500, I have credits of $600, I can only use credits of $500 and then my tax is 0 and I just lose the extra 100. So I get my number on line 56, whatever it might be, and that's my tax minus my credits. And then I come down here, my next section is other taxes. There is other taxes that might be applicable to me. If I'm self-employed, I'm going to have the self-employment tax, the Social Security and Medicare taxes owed on any income I generated from being self-employed. If you withdraw retirement funds early, sometimes there's penalties on those, usually 10%. And if I'm going to be charged a 10% tax penalty, that would go on line 59. The new and very important one, line 61, is regarding healthcare coverage. Individuals and families that don't have full year coverage are assessed the tax penalty, and that penalty goes on line 61, gets added into the tax you owed. And then there's of course some other various taxes that can be added, and those all add up here, so that line 63 we have our new total tax owed. And the last section of the return is for payments made. So we know how much tax is owed. We now need to see how much money has already been collected by the IRS to cover those taxes. So line 64, that's the income tax withheld, that pay-as-you-go procedure that's been already collected from the W-2 or the 1099. If you don't have tax withheld from a W-2 or 1099, you would have been required to make quarterly estimated tax payments. And if you had done any of that, you would then report the total tax you had paid during the year on line 65. Also on line 70 would be any tax that you had paid in when you filed an extension on your return. Occasionally you might think, ooh, I might owe some tax, so I'm filing an extension and I'm going to send in some extra money, just in case. That would go on line 70. The rest of these are what we call refundable tax credits. These are similar to the other ones, credits that are given for various situations, except these are refundable. So even if you owe 0 tax, if you have a credit amount calculated in this section, the payment section, you receive that money whether or not you have tax owed. So they call those refundable credits. So if my total next tax number here on line 63 is 0, I can still get money back based on the credits earned in this section. Once you figure out all of your refundable tax credits and taxes paid, the total goes on line 74 and is subtracted from your total tax, which gets you your net figure. Obviously, if you have more payments on line 74 than you owe in tax on line 63, that means you're getting a refund. And if you don't have enough payments to cover the tax calculated, then you would owe a certain amount. Line 79 is for any estimated tax penalty. The bottom of the return, most importantly, you need to make sure the taxpayer signs and dates it, and that you list here their occupations and their daytime phone number. And even more importantly, for paid preparers, such as myself and such as you may find yourself, this bottom section needs to be completed. So that's a brief overview of the Form 1040. Like I said, there's countless schedules and forms that flow into this, but this is your main reporting form. And I encourage you to continue to reference back to this form as you learn the various tax laws and concepts that apply to the different lines of income and deduction that show on here.